Hello, everybody. I'm really happy to be here, honored, of course, and also honored because I've just recently started to at the Tallinn University, so being at the stage now is a pleasure. I hope it's a pleasure for you too. So Neurocinematics is the topic today. I'm a filmmaker, my background, but then I've been working the last 8 years before coming here, creating this new paradigm of neurosciences, which is called Neurocinematics. Without people, looks pretty empty, so we change the slide. And suddenly complexity enters the screen. We have here a film by Lars von Trier, an image from his film Melancholia, dealing with pretty complex issues. I don't go to the plot, those who have seen it are a little bit privileged here. But anyway, but then what we have here, we have several people, and in this case several brains watching the film. So my topic in Neurocinematics is, as I said, a relatively new paradigm in neurosciences, and it's at the same time a new approach to film arts. So it uses movies to study human brain functions when people are watching films, observing events in people acting on the screen in very complex everyday situations, or in this case not so everyday situation, because a huge planet is going to crash to the Earth and destroy the Earth in a few days. Okay. And the audience. So the complexity of the setting is clear. We have a complex narrative and several people with complex brains. So complexity is a very high character feature here. When conducting a neurocinematic study, you take these people one by one, and you take them into the brain lab, you push them into a magnetic resonance imaging machine. It's a tube where you lie still while watching a movie and a back projection and hearing the sound on the earphones. And meanwhile, you watch the movie, we record the brain activation. So many questions relate to the trust emerge in this case, the topic of the day, beliefs, faith, and also trust related to those terms. I did not take the trouble to write all the possible questions here on the screen because there are many, but I have framed 3 different aspects of trust that one should consider, especially as a neurocinematician, you have to take into account. So, these are actually, they are general questions that every scientist should ask him or herself. So we can ask that, can you trust your method? Very important question. What kind of method do you choose for finding answers to your question? Here we have an image of the Aalto University Brain Imaging Center. So with this kind of machine, we tracked people's brains and also tracked their eye movements. It's important to track eye movements also because when you scan people who are lying in the scanner for half an hour or even during the full movie, they might fall asleep. So if you don't need the eye data for your research, at least you can guarantee that your subject don't sleep. Then can you trust your data? So you have zeros and ones in different order, and then visualizations are generated from this data. So all these processes are very vulnerable for distortion and mistakes. And of course, can you trust your own brain? The most crucial question. When designing the brain that designs the experiment, that visualizes the data, interprets the data, all these brains. When I talk about the brain, in this sense, your own brain, we of course are talking about several people working in a team. Can you trust the human factor? It's also the same with the subjects. Can you trust your subjects that they actually take your experiment seriously and produce what you're gonna need? Okay, case study puzzle film Memento will highlight to you one example of the neurocinematic studies, so you get a little bit understanding how it works. So we had here Leonardo Shelby, who could not trust his memory in the film. He trusted random Polaroid images and tattoos on his body to reconstruct his situations again and again. What my team did, we scanned 13 different people watching this film, Memento, in a puzzle version, and another 12 people watching the chronological version in a functional magnetic resonance imaging scanner. And what was interesting in this film, and very important for us, was that this film has certain images that appear twice. And the idea was that when the particular film image appears twice, the second time, we can assume that the person who has been watching carefully the film will realize that this section, this scene, with this image belongs together with the one that we saw previously. In this experiment, we asked people how does the human brain recall and connect relevant memories with unfolding events. And the scenes are presented in chronologically reverse order, with certain scenes briefly overlapping previously presented scenes. And these overlapping keyframes serve as effective memory cues for the viewer, what we assumed prompting recall of relevant memories of a previously seen scenes and connecting them with the concurrent scene. And we hypothesized in this experiment that these repeating keyframes serve as immediate recall cues and would facilitate reconstruction of the story piece by piece. We were happy to actually identify a certain set of brain areas that we could argue that are related, are assigned to the narrative reconstruction while watching the film. So these particular kind of what we call fingerprint patterns in the brain for narrative comprehension or narrative reconstruction were found to emerge during these keyframe scenes, the key scenes, images that appeared the second time. And given the real-life likeness of cinematic experience, these results provide new insight into how human brain recalls, gives proper cues and relevant memories to facilitate understanding and prediction of everyday life events. In summary, we would say that we can assume that executing continuous sense-making and reconstruction of narrative situations to a great extent takes place in these particular brain areas, and same functions can be assumed to hold for sense-making also in everyday life. So what happened is a neuroskeptic spotted us, and that's scary enough. Neuroskeptic is a blogger, neuroskeptic, who takes one study time per time to look at it more closely. So we were very scared. Publicity is good if the review is positive, and bad if it's negative. And luckily, Neuroskeptic this time referred to our paper as wonderful, which was very nice. And our study got a broad international audience worldwide. But we can recall to the hard question, that of trust. How can we trust our method, our data, and the human factor, making interpretations of the data? So here, I think that interdisciplinarity becomes interdisciplinarity is the key to the great trust in neurocinematics. And I go into a little more detail here, taking the screen a scary word of epistemology. So the epistemology of neurocinematics relies on triangulation. Knowing the angle of 2 of the corners, you can calculate the angle of the 3rd corner. And it's pretty steady model. Mathematicians trust this. As I also asked of Kalev, reconfirmed it, so even in distorted world context, this is a true method, a steady method, and so we trust it. The epistemology here builds on a fundamentally pragmatist idea that no 2 domains of knowledge are enough to explain one another in a dualistic setting, but a 3rd is always required to provide an interpretative angle to the interpretation. And in a triangle of neurocinematic epistemology, we have 3 corners here. We have the psychophysiology, referring to the collected brain data, body-brain data. Also, we can collect other psychophysiological data from the subjects. That data that they cannot personally or consciously manipulate. Then we have the experience, collecting subjective experiences. As everybody who works with subjects and subjective reports knows that subjective reports can be distorted to some extent. It's not me. To some extent. And then we have the narrative structure. Of course, here in Neurocinematics, we are talking about cinematic structures and the content that everybody has been seeing. So, for instance, here, understanding narrative content needs to be analyzed not only based on subjective reports of the viewer, because that is not anchored to the overall general understanding, but the subjectiveness, but they also need to be related to the neurophysiological repertoire of the experience. And similarly, if we being able to describe the neural activity data collected during the viewing of the film, it's not enough to relate it to the subjective reports of the viewer, but also to the observations also needed to interpret the conventions of cinematic narratives and methods of filmmaking, and so on. So all these multiple research perspectives to this phenomena on scrutiny are found in the Neurocinematics, foundation of the Neurocinematics. Okay, for the end, we take a little look on orange blobs on the brain moving while the tension grows. It shows how similarly all subjects' brain activates when watching the scene. The gray areas in turn refer to the person's private idiosyncratic behavior. And so those who, I changed the slide, so, okay, I stop it. So I forgot to warn you, there might be disturbing scenes on the screen. So depending on your discipline, your field of science or expertise, different questions arise. If you are a psychologist or artist, you have different perspectives to this setting than neuroscientists, for example. Okay, unfortunately, often different disciplines have a great distrust towards one another. So what I suggest is, imagine how much more understanding we would get if not only brain scientists and data miners studied the movie viewing experience, but the whole army of humanists would join the battle for deeper knowledge. Social scientists, artists, philosophers, psychologists, you name any. The more insightful perspectives to the phenomena under the study, the more we can trust on our findings. And I believe that the Neurocinematics will have contribution to understanding human mind and socio-cultural world we live in, allowing cross-disciplinary exchange of thoughts and thereby increasing trust between different disciplines. Neurocinematics is a field of science that now have reached the point where it can surrender itself to the service of the humanities and arts, in addition to already established contribution to medical sciences and psychology. Thank you, Tänään. Thank you.